Today, I'm going to explain an action crime movie called Bodies at Rest. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens on Christmas Eve in Hong Kong, which is being battered by the heaviest rainfall for the past 20 years. But business is as usual at the Kwai Chung Public Laboratory, where forensic pathologist Nick Chung is engrossed in his work. He is working on the corpse of an obese man whose wife is currently under investigation for murdering him. Apart from Nick, lab technician Li Qiang and a security guard that they lovingly call Uncle King are also present in the building. Shortly afterwards, Li joins Nick in the forensic lab, where the latter is concluding the case of the obese man. The cause of death is pinpointed as cardiac failure due to a blocked artery. This vital information will help the man's wife get exonerated. Meanwhile, Uncle King inhales from his asthma pump and takes his seat in front of the security screens. Unbeknownst to these people, 3 rogue policemen, Richie, Herod, and Jia Yi, are sitting in a car right in front of the lab. These men were recently involved in a drug deal in which Richie had shot and killed the girlfriend of a powerful drug lord. They want to retrieve the bullet from her corpse so that no one can implicate them in the murder. They then quickly disembark from the vehicle and cut the connection lines from the CCTV cameras. Inside, Uncle King is left confused as the screens in front of him go blank all of a sudden. He doesn't have to wait too long to know why, as the 3 rogue policemen wearing Christmas masks enter with their guns drawn. They hold him hostage, take his cell phone, and cut the landline as well as the internet connection to the building. They then force Uncle King to lead them to the lab, where Nick and Lee have already begun their second case for the night. Soon, the intruders force the doctor and the lab assistant to hand over their cell phones. Richie, who is clearly the leader of the gang, specifies their purpose for the visit. He asks if the mortuary had received the corpse of a young woman named Anki Cheng last night. The doctor says they did, and Richie quickly asks if they have done her autopsy or x-ray. In response, the doctor says they haven't done so, indicating that the forensic details about her death are still not registered in the lab's database. Suddenly, Herod notices Uncle King sneakily using a mobile phone under his coat. He immediately snatches the phone and twists the security guard's arm. Richie then warns everyone to follow his instructions if they want to make it out alive. He also tells Herod to keep a close eye on the lab assistant. Jia Yi is then ordered to go with the doctor and retrieve the bullet from Anki's body. After a while, the doctor and Jia Yi make it to the mortuary, where several hundred bodies are kept for forensic testing. Nick notices that Jia Yi is very uncomfortable around corpses. He knows that the bullet is an important piece of evidence that can help implicate the murders, so he begins to narrate what he is doing in gory detail, which makes Jia Yi recoil in disgust. The thug doesn't realize that the doctor is simply pretending to perform an autopsy on a corpse, which he had already checked before. Nick then takes out a bullet from the body and hands it to Jia Yi, who is standing several feet away. After getting what they wanted, the thugs lock Nick, Lee, and Uncle King in the mortuary. This way, the trio will slowly freeze to death, and the whole thing will look like an accident. They leave the lab and drive away to dispose of the bullet in the nearby harbor. Nick, meanwhile, finds the actual corpse of Anki Chen and removes the bullet that was lodged underneath her ribcage. Elsewhere, the 3 rogue policemen reach the harbor. It is revealed that Jia Yi and Herod are brothers, while Richie is their senior officer. The siblings are extremely happy and quickly disembark from the car, chatting with each other. Jia Yi is recounting what happened in the mortuary, pointing out that he never saw the face of the girl out of disgust. Upon hearing this, Richie demands to see the bullet that the doctor had handed over. His fears come true when he sees that the sample is a hollow point bullet, completely different from the ammunition he uses. This makes the thugs realize that they've been hoodwinked and quickly head back. In the lab, Nick opens the mortuary's door using a lever kept for emergency situations like this. He then checks the lab's computers for the records of Anki. The doctor gets to know that she was killed in a shootout during a drug deal that went bad. Rather suspiciously, the cash that was used in the deal is still missing. Meanwhile, Lee is searching for Uncle King's inhaler when she sees the 3 thugs arrive at the lab's front door. This sends her into panic mode, so she quickly rushes back in and informs the others. Almost immediately, Nick, Lee, and Uncle King run away from their pursuers. They head out the back door and make it to the exit gate. This is when their luck runs out, as the gate is locked and the key is still in reception reception. They have only one way to get away, by jumping over it. Unfortunately, Uncle King's injured arm slows them down, and the thugs soon catch up to them. Following this, the laboratory staff are taken back inside, where Richie shoots Uncle King in the head. An incensed Nick lunges at Richie, and the two men begin to fight each other. But in an obvious outcome, the thug thoroughly beats the doctor, then smacks Lee across the face. He is about to do further damage when suddenly a nearby intercom device starts beeping. It turns out Kit, a worker from the Hong Kong funeral home, has come to pick up the dead bodies whose autopsies have been completed. Nick states that if they don't let him in, Kit will phone his boss and say that he received no bodies from the lab. This will only increase suspicion, and soon several officers will arrive to check what's going on. Shortly afterwards, Richie gives instructions to his men so that everything looks normal. Herod keeps an eye on Nick, who is forced to go to the front gate to receive the funeral home employee. Jie, meanwhile, takes Lee to the mortuary, where he once again starts getting queasy. In the lobby, Nick lets the funeral home employee enter inside and begins loading the corpses using an electric crane. Kit seems to be in a jolly good mood, and it is obvious that he has been drinking a bit. He is quite chatty and starts roaming around the lobby mindlessly. Nick uses this opportunity to deliberately cut his finger and write an SOS message on the sheet that is covering one of the corpses. Unfortunately, when Kit comes to take the body, he has a flask of alcohol in his hand. He accidentally drops a little bit of alcohol on the covering, which wipes out the SOS message. It's a Christmas miracle for the bad guys. The doctor is now forced to let go of the man who could have helped him get out of this dire situation. Back in the mortuary, Lee uses her martial arts skills to knock out Jie. She then steals his gun and heads out towards the lobby. Meanwhile, Herod is also headed towards the spot to check on his brother and the captive, but Lee spots him first and fires a bullet into his abdomen region. The thug then falls to the floor, giving her time enough to escape. Shortly afterwards, Lee reaches the lab where Nick is currently being held hostage by Richie. She immediately points her gun at the thug and tells him to drop his weapon. Nick also takes his phone and dials 999, which is the number to Hong Kong's emergency services. Unfortunately, their luck runs out once more as both Jie and Herod arrive at the lab. It turns out that the latter had been wearing a Kevlar vest, which helped him survive the gunshot. Jie, on the other hand, is injured but fully conscious. The thugs then force the doctor to cut the 999 call before he can even utter a single word. Herod is so incensed that he is about to shoot Lee in the head, but his boss stops him. "You can't kill that one. He's a main character." Following this, the scene abruptly shifts, and we see that Nick and Lee are now being forced to operate on Anki Cheng's corpse. The doctor has already taken out the bullet earlier, so he now comes up with a credible-sounding excuse. He makes an incision on Anki's back and declares that the bullet actually went through her body. However, their conversation is suddenly interrupted when the lab's intercom device beeps. It is revealed that two policemen have arrived at the lab's gate because they had earlier received a 999 call. This time, Richie takes matters into his own hands and instructs his men to dress up as the lab's staff. This also forces them to take off their masks and reveal their true identities. Initially, all seems to be going well for the thugs. As they show the cops around the lab, Richie confidently tells them that everything is fine, while Jie forces the doctor and the lab assistant to act normally. But things start going south when one of the cops notices a bullet shell along with broken shards of glass nearby. In a sudden burst of activity, the two cops draw their guns on Nick and Herod. They are not sure what's going on, but suspect something fishy. One of the cops begins to question Nick, when suddenly, Herod also whips out his gun. Soon, the entire lab drowns into chaos, with multiple shots being fired in every direction. Richie manages to run away from the spot, while his men engage in a scuffle with the cops. Eventually, the thugs overpower their opponents, and Herod shoots the cops dead. But soon after, Nick uses the corpse-loading crane to suddenly choke Herod to death. This allows Lee to run away, while Nick stays behind to keep the thugs distracted. Soon afterwards, Richie returns to the lab and sees that one of his men has been killed. He brutally beats the doctor with Jie's help and ties his hands up. They then take him to the lobby and place him right over the broken shards of glass. After this, Jie enters the morgue as he had caught a glimpse of Lee running towards that room. It turns out that she's actually hiding in the top bunker, disguised as a dead body. An enraged Jie then begins shooting random corpses, while his boss is checking other possible rooms. Suddenly, Lee jumps from her bunker and ambushes Jie, who has been gravely hurt during the earlier skirmish with the cops. She uses all of her remaining energy to lay a beat down and eventually traps him under a metallic shelf. Similarly, in the lobby, Nick is all alone and uses a shard of glass to cut the zip tie around his wrists. He is quickly joined by Lee, and the two embrace each other tightly. Following this, they hatch up a plan to free themselves from the thugs once and for all. They head to the central office of the lab, where Nick takes over the entire building's intercom device. He begins to talk about his theory on how the thugs killed Anki Chang. His voice booms across several intercom speakers that are placed in all corners of the lab. In a flashback scene, we see that Richie, Herod, and Jai Yi were guarding a drug deal between a rich Thai smuggler and a Hong Kong-based dealer. They were regularly bribed by the dealer to turn a blind eye towards the smuggling and distribution of drugs. Anki Chang, who is the dealer's girlfriend, was waiting in the bedroom right next to where the deal was taking place. Everything seemed to be okay until the Thai smuggler started demanding extremely high prices. Since the men were all high on drugs and alcohol, the matter escalated into a full-blown shooting. Everyone was killed except the dealer, who was gravely injured, and Anki, who hid in a nearby closet. Hearing the commotion, the three cops, Richie, Herod, and Jai Yi, entered the room only to notice the utter chaos. They saw a fat bag full of money and swiftly broke the dealer's neck, killing him for good. However, Richie heard Anki whimpering in the bedroom and, without thinking, shot her right below the chest. This killed her instantly, and the corrupt cop soon realized that he had used his service gun to shoot her. It is the main reason why the three came to the lab, so that they could erase all traces of their crime. Back in the present, Richie is spooked by how accurate the doctor's theory is. He looks at one of the intercom speakers and sees that the doctor is speaking from the central office. What he doesn't realize is that Nick and Lee have set up a trap for him. Shortly afterwards, the disgraced cop reaches the central office with his gun drawn. He cautiously steps in, completely unaware that Lee has scattered extremely flammable powder all over the floor. She is watching from nearby, hiding behind a desk. Just as Richie steps on the powder, she drops a flask full of hydrogen peroxide on the floor. The thug's legs are immediately engulfed in flames, and he tries to save himself using a nearby fire extinguisher, but this only confirms his doom, as Nick had placed a volatile substance in the office's oven. Now, with the rapidly expanding gas from the fire extinguisher, the whole room will explode in around 4 minutes. As the thug is busy saving his legs, Lee tries to sneak towards the doctor. Unfortunately, Richie spots her and draws his gun at her. This forces Nick to come out of hiding and jump on the thug. A fierce fight then breaks out as the men toss and throw each other all over the office. This is when the volatile substance reacts with the gas from the fire extinguisher's gas. The resulting explosion yeets Richie out of the room, while the doctor and the lab assistant duck behind a desk. In the aftermath, the thug slowly gets back to his feet, his gun drawn. Nick and Lee also get their wits back, only to see that the villain is aiming at them. Everything looks doomed until Nick takes out a bullet from his pocket. Richie realizes that this is the same piece of evidence for which he had come to the lab. Suddenly, Nick tosses the bullet in Richie's direction, and the latter tries to grab it. The thug doesn't realize that he is standing on the edge of the office's balcony. In his desperation to catch the bullet, he falls to the floor below and succumbs to his injuries. On the other hand, Nick and Lee jump out of the office just before the whole place is engulfed in fire. The film ends as the police arrive at the scene, and we see that Nick and Lee are both alive.